This happened over 10 years ago. It was during my very last semester of college. I was majoring in history, and I was deep into my senior thesis, which focused on abandoned institutional spaces. Places like defunct hospitals, asylums, rehab centers, especially ones that still existed in or around major cities. One of the cases I was writing about was North Brother Island. It was this overgrown island right in the East River. Technically part of New York City, but it had been completely abandoned for decades. As far as I know, it's still exactly the same, but I haven't been in New York City in a long time, so I really wouldn't know. Here's a very abbreviated history. It used to house a quarantine hospital, then a rehab center, and then at some point in the distant past, it became off-limits to the public. Unless something has changed, you still need a permit just to set foot there. In fact, it's probably even more heavily guarded now, considering how seriously the US takes security these days. That's all you really need to know about it. But for any fellow history buffs out there, feel free to do your own research. You might even find my thesis. I never actually planned on going. That would have been illegal. But I mentioned it offhand one night to two of my friends, Jansen and Jesse, while we were drinking. I was probably frustrated at how long the thesis was taking, knowing how lazy and unproductive I was back then. Surprisingly, they both thought my thesis sounded really interesting, even though neither of them were history majors. So I told them some of the interesting details about the places I was researching. The moment they realized that one of the places was literally in the same city we were sitting in, they got hooked. Jansen and Jesse, and I guess myself by extension, were really into that whole urban exploration vibe back then. It was pretty popular among young guys at the time. They both thought it sounded like the perfect target for an urban exploration trip. And I'll admit, after all the research I'd done, I was curious too. Not in a ghost hunting way or anything. More like, if I was going to describe the place in my thesis, why not actually see it with my own eyes? Fast forward a few weeks, and that's how we found ourselves sneaking through Fort Totten Park in the Bronx at 2 a.m. with 3 solo kayaks in tow. It was one of the few spots along the shoreline where you could launch without attracting attention, and it was only about a half-mile paddle to the island. We had a bunch of supplies, probably more than we needed, but we figured we'd play it safe. The plan was to leave around 2:30, explore the island for a few hours while it was still dark, and be back before sunrise. It felt stupid and thrilling at the same time. The best kind of fun. Getting the kayaks into the water was surprisingly easy. I hadn't anticipated how deserted the park would be at that time of night. But once we started paddling toward the island, reality began to sink in. There was nothing stopping us anymore. All we had to do was keep paddling. And that's when a bit of nervousness started creeping in. But we kept going. And eventually, we made it. Pulling the kayaks onto shore was a bit of a struggle because of all the overgrowth. We had to push through tall reeds and weeds just to find a stable spot. Once we were on solid ground, the 3 of us just stood there for a second, taking it all in. It was dark, obviously, but we had flashlights, and the moon was bright enough to make out the general shapes of everything. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. I know that sounds cliché, but you have to understand, we were still in New York City. The Bronx was right there, maybe half a mile away. And yet, it felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. We started walking inland. It didn't take long for Jansen and Jesse to realize just how big the island actually was. I had told them beforehand that it wasn't a small place, but they clearly hadn't internalized it. As we moved deeper, we passed building after building. Most of them partially collapsed or so overgrown that you Could barely tell they were structures anymore. At one point, Jesse stopped and stared at a building that had a tree literally growing through it, splitting it in half. He said it looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic video game, and he wasn't wrong. That's exactly what it felt like. There was something almost alien about how nature had reclaimed everything. Like the island was swallowing any evidence that humans had ever been there. I remember thinking that if I didn't know better, I would have assumed the place had been abandoned for centuries, not decades. We explored a few of the more intact buildings, shining our flashlights into rooms that hadn't seen visitors in God knows how long. Most were empty, but in one of the larger buildings, Jansen found something near a doorway, a half-empty can of spray paint. He immediately wanted to use it, and Jesse agreed. I told them no, that it felt disrespectful, not just to the buildings, but to the history of the place. People had lived there. People had died there. But they pointed out that there was already graffiti everywhere, some of it pretty elaborate, and argued that a little more wouldn't matter. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing, so I told them I wasn't going to stop them. But I wasn't going to watch either. In hindsight, walking off alone was probably a mistake. I made my way through a few more rooms, trying to take mental notes for my thesis. But the farther I got from Jansen and Jesse, the more unsettling everything became. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. When you're with other people, even in a creepy place, there's a buffer. You feel safer, but when you're alone, it's completely different. I was walking down a long hallway when I heard Jesse's voice call my name from somewhere ahead. It made me jump. Even though I knew it was him, I was still freaked out. I started walking toward it, but something felt off. For Jesse to be ahead of me, he would have had to take a completely different route through the building. Not impossible, but it would mean he left Jansen immediately and rushed ahead. That didn't make sense. Why would he do that? There were too many rooms branching off the hallway, and I couldn't tell exactly where the voice came from, so I called out, asking where he was. I got a response almost immediately, from a room just a few doors down. It was Jesse's voice. He said, "In here." I walked toward the room. The doorway was darker than the already dark hallway, and I couldn't see inside. I figured they were messing with me, trying to scare me. That's exactly the kind of thing Jansen would find funny. I stepped inside, and when I shined my flashlight across the room, I saw a figure standing in the far corner, facing the wall. For a split second, my brain tried to convince me it was one of my friends, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. Whoever it was, they were tall, really tall, easily 6.5 feet, maybe more. Neither Jansen nor Jesse were anywhere close to that height. I can't fully explain how terrifying that moment was. I screamed. I didn't even think. I just reacted. I turned and ran out of that room as fast as I could. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I was yelling for Jansen and Jesse to run, as loud as I possibly could. I have never been more scared in my life. It felt like whatever had been in that room was going to come after me, or that something else would jump out from one of the countless pitch-black rooms I was sprinting past. I finally found them near where we had originally split up. The moment they saw me running toward them like that, they didn't even ask questions. They just started running too. We didn't stop until we reached the kayaks. Once we caught our breath, I told them everything. At first, they didn't believe me, which, honestly, I understood. If Johnson had told me the same story, I probably would have thought he was messing with me. But I kept insisting. I told them I wasn't joking, that I wasn't making it up. And after a minute or so, they started to look scared too. We all agreed on one thing. We needed to leave. Immediately. Whatever we had come to see. It wasn't worth staying. But just as we started dragging the kayaks back toward the water, we heard it. All three of us. At the exact same time. A sound. Faint, but clear. A moaning noise. Coming from somewhere behind us. From the darkness. It sounded like a woman. An older woman. Like she was crying. Or in pain. It wasn't loud. But it was distinct enough that once you focused on it, you couldn't ignore it. None of us said anything. But I could tell Jansen and Jesse were panicking. And honestly, so was I. My hands were shaking as we shoved the kayaks into the water. We didn't look back. Not once. The paddle back felt like it took forever. But eventually, we made it. The entire drive afterward, none of us could stop talking about what had happened. We went over every detail, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some kind of logical explanation. But the thing I kept coming back to, the thing that disturbed me the most, was the voice. Because that was Jesse's voice I heard in that hallway. I know Jesse's voice, as well as I know my own. And whatever called out to me sounded exactly like him. Perfectly. Except Jesse was never there. He was with Jansen the entire time. I've thought about going back over the years, but I never have. For one thing, I'm pretty sure it's basically impossible now. From what I've read, they've really cracked down on unauthorized access. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't get within 100 yards of that island without being stopped. I don't believe in the paranormal. I never have, but I still can't explain what happened that night. Someone was on that island with us. Someone who knew my name. Someone who could mimic a voice perfectly. And I don't think I'll ever get an answer.